a special thanks to our host at Universidad EAN for recognizing the importance of this topic and amplifying the event. To our esteemed panelists and moderator, to the teams here in Bogota and in Brussels that made it all come together. And finally, to all of you for joining us in the discussion. Thank you. We are just less than a week away from NATO's summit in Vilnius, Lithuania. And this is a prime opportunity to explore the unique nature of Colombia's relationship with NATO. As some of you may know, in 2017, Colombia officially became a NATO global partner. It remains the only country in Latin America to have that status. In March of 2022, President Biden designated Colombia a major non-NATO U.S. ally, noting that Colombia is a keystone to our shared efforts to build a prosperous, secure, and democratic hemisphere. And I could not agree more. Colombia's own history of supporting global democracies is a testament to the potential of a strong bilateral relationship between Colombia and NATO. Colombia, for example, has sent thousands of soldiers to defend democracy during World War II and again in the Korean War across a broad range of issues, from migration to human rights, counter narcotics to defense cooperation, combating climate change and the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. The United States and Colombia have worked together for years. And in all of those areas, NATO is also a key player. It is these themes which I hope are the focus of today's discussion. I encourage my Colombian friends watching today to remember that NATO is more than just a security body. It is a force for global good. Let me point to a key example. On climate change, NATO leaders in June 2001 endorsed NATO's climate change and security agenda. Colombia and NATO have an enormous opportunity to work together in support of President Gustavo Petro's own vision, which states climate change is the principal problem of humanity. We have so much work we can do together. Again, thank you very much for your participation today. Let us continue to work together to build a more secure and prosperous future for all. I look forward to this panel discussion. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, embajador Palmieri. Es un gusto para nosotros tenerlo a
Thank
usted
you,
y
Ambassador
todos
Palmieri. It is a
nuestros
pleasure
invitados
for
en
us to have you
esta
today and to have all
discusión.
of our guests in this discussion today. I would like to propose that we start working this way. I am going to introduce our panelists in this discussion, and after that, I'm going to give you a brief description of the methodology that we'll be following today. To start, we will have the first intervention by the Ambassador of the United States before NATO, Ma'am Julianne Smith. Then we will have the Ambassador of Colombia before NATO, the European Union, Luxembourg, and Brussels, Ambassador Jorge Rojas Rodriguez. And after that, we will have an intervention by the President of EAN University, Mrs. Brigitte Baptiste, and then we will have the intervention of the Ambassador of the United Kingdom before NATO, Mr. David Quarrey. After this, we will proceed to questions. We are not going to process questions through the Facebook comments or the YouTube section in their comment sections, but the way we're going to process them is through this Slido platform. In the comment section for Facebook and YouTube, you will find a link that will lead you to this platform that I have just mentioned. This is where you will be able to pose your questions. Please publish your questions with hashtag 2492433 in the comment section, and this will enable you to access Slido. I will collect these questions again with the hashtag 2949133. This is going to be mainly a discussion orbiting the importance of the strategic partnership in matters of security, as Ambassador Palmieri pointed out, in matters of climate change between the government of Colombia and NATO. And this is a discussion that is basically the introduction to the upcoming summit in Vilnius, Lithuania, the next summit of NATO. With this being said, I would like to ask the panelists to give a short 3-minute intervention where you can tell us about what you believe is the importance of this strategic partnership there is between Colombia and NATO faced with the upcoming summit in Lithuania. To start, I would like to start asking the Ambassador of the United States before NATO, Julianne Smith. Would you kindly take the floor with your intervention? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Sandra, for that introduction. Thanks to you for moderating the discussion today. And let me also thank the University of EAN for working with us on this important program. And of course, thank all the other panelists and folks participating in this important discussion. Today, very pleased to share the stage with Ambassador Rojas Rodriguez. It's an honor to work with you. We were able to meet just recently and compare notes on this important partnership between NATO and Colombia, and also a pleasure to work with my UK colleague, Ambassador David Quarrey, who's here with us. And of course, the UK serves as Colombia's contact point embassy. Let me start by just offering my condolences first and foremost to the 3 Colombians who tragically lost their lives in the missile strikes that recently took place in Kyiv. Tragically, Russia's targeting of civilians continues to show all of us their blatant disregard for human life and international law, and please accept my sympathy. Now, on this really remarkable partnership between NATO and Colombia, this is something that both sides, I believe, find tremendous value in. It was just about 2.5 years ago that we here at NATO finished with our Colombian partners, what we call an individually tailored partnership program, or ITPP. And what this does is it allows us to do more good work together in the areas of interoperability, or building integrity, training and education, climate security, and many other issue areas. This partnership fundamentally, in our eyes, makes the NATO alliance safer, and it makes our friends in Colombia safer by allowing us to come together and share our responses to shared security challenges and global challenges like climate security. It allows us to work together on things like women, peace, and security, and human security. It allows us to get training from our friends in Colombia on demining, where they really lead the way and can teach us here at NATO a great deal about how to tackle that specific challenge. So in short, we value this relationship tremendously. It's unique, and we'd like to look for ways to continue to strengthen it. And of course, from a U.S. perspective, we also value our very close and strong partnership bilaterally with our friends in Colombia. And you heard at the top, friend Francisca mention just recently the fact that President Biden had approved non-NATO status for our friends in Colombia. So we're looking forward to this discussion. We are about a week away from a big summit in Lithuania, where our partnerships will be a key part of what we talk about and what we do. And thanks again for the opportunity to engage with this important audience on the other side of the Atlantic.
Muchísimas gracias, embajadora Smith. Le doy entonces la palabra al embajador Jorge.
Thank you, Ambassador Smith. We would like to open the floor to Ambassador Rojas from Colombia. Thank you very much, Professor Sandra. Kind greetings to my colleague and friend, Ambassador Palmieri in Bogota, and my colleagues, Ambassador Smith, Ambassador Schmidt here in Brussels, Ambassador President Brigitte. It is a pleasure for me to share this discussion with you and you all today. So the discussion is about the partnership, what it means to Colombia, what this participation means as a strategic partner before NATO. And I have to clarify a few things. First of all, we are strategic partners. We are NATO partners, but we are not a part of the partnership. What does this mean? In this world, this universe of 68 countries, there are 31 partner countries responding to a Washington Treaty with connotations from the military point of view. But of course, in the world, as I said before, there are 37 countries which are NATO associates, and that's the status that Colombia has. And so I want to highlight what Ambassador Palmieri said along the lines of the fact that this is a political international alliance and association. There are decisions made by the heads of state, the heads of governments, the ambassadors and ministers, ministers of defense and ministers of foreign affairs. Therefore, there are political decisions that are made, which is precisely what is going to happen at the summit in Vilnius, Lithuania. So we are NATO partners, and this new administration has been very clear in stating that we maintain, respect, and observe these agreements that we have signed internationally. And so we wish to ratify these commitments in this conversation. So, how can we summarize our interest vis-a-vis NATO today? I would like to say, first of all, we value political dialogue, which enables us to discuss these new topics of international security, which enable us to observe all the challenges that we have as humanity looking towards the future. And in this case, we have a great opportunity because President Gustavo Petro has been vocal as to the need that we have to face the climate crisis. And I believe this is a very strong common connection of our association with NATO. But of course, there are other practical topics that we need to
dentro de
review
esta asociación. Nosotros
in this association, in this membership. We have discussed several topics and we have capabilities that we can share with NATO. For example, humanitarian demining. We have a possibility to train officials around the world, but we also benefit from the immense experience that NATO has worldwide. As associates, we do not partake in military operations. We do not have NATO military presence in Colombia. And so we have the possibility to also establish links or relationships with countries in the region, since Colombia is the only non-member, non-NATO member in Latin America and the Caribbean. Therefore, I would like to make reference to 2 or 3 concrete points in this regard. Number one, it is the construction of integrity that we have been working on ever since we started becoming non-members or associates of NATO, and even before. And it revolves around the possibility to work towards transparency, against corruption, and to generate governance in the defense sector, which is related to democracy and human rights. We have a lot to contribute here. We have a lot to learn in this regard as well. And the exchanges that we have at an inter-peer level are very important. And the report that we are going to submit makes part of this democratic commitment for defense with which we are committed. In specific regards to climate change, I would have to say this is the biggest challenge humanity has today. Therefore, this partnership, we believe, is a platform for us to begin preparing and adapting all this cogwheel, all this structure in order to defend the planet. We're going to need a host of resources, even military resources. in order to save water, to save life, to save climate and on this planet. So the upcoming Lithuania summit should also include all these challenges that we have and all these needs that I have just mentioned. And this is not only a matter of raising awareness, but also humanity adapting to these new climate changes and mitigating its effects. The last point that I would like to present has to do with women, peace, and security, which is a constant element in NATO. If we look at the historical development of Colombia, our policy in terms of security, defense, and social and citizen coexistence, we will find commonalities with NATO that have to do with the security, the human security focus, also in relation to the need to recognize the participation of women and the need that we have to include diversity, sexual diversity, to include the youth, to include ethnic communities. This being said, with NATO, we work towards these challenges of inclusion and democracy, and Colombia will continue to decidedly partake in this exercise and towards the vision of the new
Senador
government.
Rojas
Thank you,
Rodríguez, quisiera
Ambassador
recordarle a las
Rojas.
personas que nos están
I would
viendo
like
que
to remind all following us that you can post your questions through this Slido platform on the comment section in YouTube and Facebook. You will find a link for us to receive your questions. We shall continue to hear the president of EAN University Brigitte Baptiste. Kind greetings, Sandra, and thank you very much. Kind greetings to Ambassador Rojas, Ambassador of Colombia before NATO, Ambassadors Palmieri, Colonel and Smith. Welcome to the virtual digital university EAN. We are observing an important element in this conversation, and it's the recognition of transformation, environmental transformations of the world in our countries, which is a factor that changes the geopolitical configuration of continents completely, as well as the role of every country. So, as Ambassador Rojas well said, it is a matter of security too. We need to identify, therefore, how these ecological and climate related transformations and climate crisis related transformations will produce effects that need to be considered in security and cooperation policies between us. Obviously, climate change has different effects depending on the regions, depending of the different ecological trajectories of territories and countries. We know that the first element that will substantially change is water availability. And we all know only too well that water is fundamental to all of our economies, to industries, as proposed by our current administration. Water is a key element for rural reform, for agriculture, for cattle rearing. And so this has economic implications and therefore interests for our country and our multilateral relations. Climate change will also generate important transformations in terms of the pandemic related risks in the appearance of new zoonoses and animal borne vectors diseases, new diseases for human beings. Of course, we hope that we will have some time of peace, so to speak, after COVID, but we know that health-related threats are ever present in our countries, especially on occasion of deforestation and contamination-related problems. Deforestation is a process that affects Colombia in a special manner, as well as all the countries around the Amazon basin, and we know that Colombia and the basin has a vital importance for the planet. This is also a security-related problem. Unfortunately, the ACTO countries are retaking conversations in order to take decisive actions in this regard. In closing, I would be remiss if I were not to mention migration-related problems. We know that climate change will unleash important changes in terms of movement and migratory flows of our populations around the world, not only looking for new opportunities in terms of work and life, but also running away from heat waves, running away from droughts, running away from fires and environmental deterioration. So we can clearly identify 3 or 4 subtopics of environmental transformations that will affect us with the climate change and how these will become elements that need to be taken into account in shared security policies. Thank you. Thank you, President Baptiste. We shall now hear the Ambassador of the United Kingdom before NATO, Mr. David Quarrey. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation to join today, and thank you to EAN University for hosting us. It's a pleasure to be on the panel with my US colleague, Ambassador Smith, Ambassador Palmieri, and also Ambassador Rojas, who I had the pleasure of meeting recently. This is a great theme, I think, for discussion today. As Ambassador Smith said, we are just a week away from NATO's Vilnius Summit. It will be another really important moment for the alliance. Inevitably, because we have a land war that is raging in Europe at the moment, a lot of the focus at the Vilnius Summit will be on the current conflict following Russia's brutal and illegal invasion of Ukraine. So we'll be looking to provide a lot of support to Ukraine at the summit and to continue pursuing a just peace for Ukraine based on the principles of the UN Charter. But we will also be looking to address the full range of security challenges that face all of us in the modern world. Many of those were set out in the Alliance's strategic concept, agreed at last year's Madrid summit. And climate change, issues around women, peace and security featured very prominently there. So we want to have what we call a 360-degree approach within the Alliance, where we look at all the challenges coming from around the world toward our region, but also how we build stronger partnerships with partners around the world to combat those challenges in a shared way. Those partnerships are really important to us, and for us it's particularly important and valuable that we have Colombia as our currently only partner in Latin America. It is really clear that those partnerships only work, they only really deliver when they work for both sides. They've got to have practical consequences. They've got to deliver something tangible. And I think climate change and the impact of climate change on all of our security is a great theme for those partnerships. NATO's aspiration is to be the international security organization that is sort of furthest ahead in addressing the security dimensions of climate change. That's a great aspiration. We are making progress towards it, but frankly, we have a long way to go. There's definitely, as Ambassador Smith said, an area where we've got to learn. These partnerships have got to be two-way processes that we are each learning from and contributing to each other. We had a really interesting discussion at NATO recently about the impact of climate change on the Sahel, on Northern Africa, the impact that's having on security, on migration, on the economies of those countries, and what more we might do together. It would be a great subject to come back to sometime in NATO headquarters about the impact of climate change on security in Latin America and what we can learn from that, what experience that we can share, and how we can work together. The Women, Peace and Security agenda is fundamentally important. Every study that we look at, every piece of analysis that we do tells us that you can only achieve sustainable and lasting peace in conflict situations when gender aspects are taken fully into account in peace processes, when women are fully involved. Again, we're making progress on that, but with lots to do. And perhaps my final comment at this stage would be that we as the UK are very proud to be the contact point embassy for NATO in Colombia. It's part of our job to improve understanding of NATO in Colombia and of Colombia in NATO. We, like the US, have a very strong bilateral relationship with Colombia. We've done extraordinary cooperation, including on very sensitive security issues over the years. That cooperation has been based on familiarity and particularly trust. So I think this event today is a great step in terms of building that familiarity with each other, learning a bit from each other, I hope, and providing a foundation for deeper cooperation in the future. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias, Embajador Quarrey.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Quarrey. We have several questions on our Slido app platform. I would like to start with this question that has had several votes. And it's a question that follows the spirit of the intervention that the ambassador just gave in terms of the mutual um, wins, the mutual benefits of this relationship. How can this alliance help sort out the problem of illicit crops and deforestation in Colombia? If it is okay with you and if everybody agrees, I would like to expand this question in terms of how this alliance can help solve the problem of drug trafficking, which is not only a problem that's related to Colombia, but it calls upon the whole world. So I would like to continue in the same order of the interventions that we had for the first round. So I would like to open the floor to Ambassador Julianne Smith to open this question, to answer this question. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. On the question of climate security, I would just note at the top that while we are all in agreement here that in cooperation with our partners, NATO needs to be the leading organization to address climate security, the impact of climate change on security. We also are in agreement there are a whole host of other organizations, multilateral organizations out there, including the United Nations, among many others, that can really play the leading role in tackling the challenge of climate change. So NATO will have a clearly defined role. We're looking closely at the impact of climate on security, how it can fuel regional conflicts, interstate conflict, whether it's in regards to water scarcity or other resource scarcity, natural disasters, extreme climate events. We're thinking here and working with our partners how we can make our militaries also more green and energy efficient. And we're looking at lowering the emissions of our military forces. There's a whole range of projects that we're pursuing here inside the NATO alliance, but I'll give my UK colleague a chance to dig into that a little bit more. I will say on the other issues that you raised, particularly about drug trafficking and narcotics, I'll note that just a few years ago, I think it was in 2019, we were able to host a workshop with our friends in Colombia to look more specifically at the subject of counterterrorism. And there, that does take us to questions like drug trafficking, there's a maritime piece to this, narcotics. And here the relationship really rests upon what we can learn from one another. NATO allies are willing to come forward and share not only their experiences, but the tools that they've developed over the years, but just a basic assessment of the nature of the challenge. That's the fundamental value of this partnership. And in return, we always expect and we receive the same inputs from our friends in Colombia, sharing their best practices, their assessment of the nature of the challenge, and then what national tools is Colombia developing and creating to come at some of these challenges. It really starts fundamentally with an exchange on kind of the nature of the threat or the challenge, and then what we can do together. And I expect, building off of that good work that we've seen in the past on the subject of counterterrorism, that we can do more work together in this space in the years ahead.
Muchas gracias, Embajadora Smith. Embajador Rojas Rodriguez, usted.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Smith. Ambassador Rojas Rodriguez, would you like to talk about the expectations of Colombia and its relationship with NATO right now? Sure, and thank you for that question, because I believe there is a relationship between the drug trafficking related affairs and the affairs that have to do with peace and the affairs that have to do with climate change. And I'm pleased with this first question being associated to this first comprehensive view from the security standpoint for sure, but also from the other factors that can contribute and affect these particular three scenarios. I want to say that from the Colombian experience, we do want to take and bring forward for our friends in NATO to have a discussion about these three issues. And very surely we're going to have the opportunity of doing so and potentiating that relationship that has been strengthened over the years, not just with NATO, but with other specific bodies such as the European Union to combat and face drug trafficking. This is a ceaseless effort, and we're seeking continuous alternatives to fight this global threat. Now, there's other aspects that have to do with the role of the military services and the security bodies for these specific bodies that have to do with climate change. Let's talk about a crisis because climate change is already generating critical effects. And then we have to think about the adaptation, as Ambassador Smith was mentioning, that we need to develop using services and different bodies that are contributing to NATO to understand how we can generate an ecological policy, an ecological awareness, green economy, whatever we might call it, to adapt our military services towards this effort as well. And also to think about mitigation. I think we have a great opportunity to deal with critical situations taking place as a consequence of climate change, as long as we're able to share experiences, support each other, which is the purpose of cooperation. We are going to need this, and when this is a more effective reality, I think we have some interesting success cases already that prove this can be successful in the future. And then to protect the Amazon basin versus deforestation, I think the support from the United States is also taking place in this regard and to defend the Amazon region in Colombia right now. Thank you, Ambassador. Now, Rector Brigitte Baptiste, as the ambassador suggests, the question also appeals to drug trafficking or illegal crops and deforestation. What are your comments on this topic and the position of them? I think the Colombian NATO position is in this direction. Sure, Sandra. I would also agree with the words of Ambassador Rojas. We have to talk about innovation and creative solutions that, first of all, I think have to do with being updated in this interpretation of illegal crops and their relationship with drug trafficking phenomenon that changes so quickly and it expresses in different parts of our territory very differently, not just within Colombia, but that has effects in our neighboring countries. So we have in other countries, we have crops expanding into Central America. We have new agrarian practices that are associated to the dynamics of the coca leaf production in different locations. There's a whole illegal economy that we need to have continuous surveillance and control over. And this interpretation about the link between the illegal crops, drug trafficking, and then climate change or environmental effects, which is very different in the Pacific coast of Colombia than in the tropical coast of Nariño, Cauca, or Chocó regions, can be very different to the Amazon basin or our central areas of our country. And if we understand these links between these activities and other activities that are harder to assess, such as the expansion of cattle raising or agro-industrial activity or land hoarding, we need to have greater capacity to monitor and have better analysis so as to understand these links better and the relationships between crime, environmental effects, and the opportunity for a long-lasting peace. And this is something I want to highlight. We've been talking in academia, not only at the EAN University, but with others at a local level, about how to develop legal uses for the coca leaf, uses that do not contemplate the possibility of extracting the alkaloid and but thinking of other ancestral uses, getting to the leaf itself. You know, it's the coca leaf, which is a native plant, you can make flour out of this to make food products. You can use it for bioeconomic purposes. So there's a whole legal economy around the coca leaf or coca crop that we hopefully expect can start to compete with this international illegal market of cocaine. Thank you so much, President Baptiste. Ambassador Quarrey, a reaction about this on this topic?
No.
I
no
think
Sí. Adelante, por favor.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you. I think I'd make 3 points on this. First of all, if we're going to effectively combat narcotics trafficking, you need a strong international order. you need strong international institutions, and you need a working, effective international system. And I think one of the areas where NATO and Colombia have a lot in common and a lot of interest together is in reinforcing the open international order, rules-based international system, so that we've got the means to tackle these transnational global challenges, including drugs trafficking. So that's the first point. This ought to be an area of cooperation for us. Secondly, also, if you're going to combat things like drug trafficking, you need strong but democratically accountable security forces. Colombia's got a very strong track record in this area. Both the US and the UK have worked with Colombia on those kinds of issues. I think we have shared experience that we can bring together and possibly develop with others as well, about how you can make sure that you have armed forces which are both effective but also democratically accountable under proper civilian control. And Ambassador Rojas mentioned earlier integrity. And NATO has the Building Integrity Program, which I think, again, is a great area of cooperation for Colombia and NATO. My final point would actually be a bilateral one, that we have done some interesting work in the past in Colombia about the impact of climate change on drugs production. And we found it difficult at the start because they tend to come from different budgets in our system, a really practical point like that. So we had to change the way our system worked, have strong Colombian partners, then to start understanding these connections. And that would be a great issue to bring for discussion, for example, here at NATO, about how you take different issues, which are often dealt with by different parts of government, to try to bring them together in a single holistic approach to big shared challenges. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias, Embajador Quarrey. La segunda.
Thank you, Ambassador Quarrey. And the second question that received the higher amount of votes in Slido is perhaps existential in its nature, but I believe an important question nonetheless. One of our audience members wonders why Colombia is a member of NATO. What benefits does Colombia obtain, and what has motivated then, as Ambassador Quarrey mentioned, our special standing within this organization. So I think the first person to answer this question, I think, would be Ambassador Rojas Rodriguez. What are your comments, sir? I would say Colombia, as my colleagues and ambassadors have said, has been a member of OTAN since 2020, but it's a process that has prior efforts that you can date to a whole decade before that. We will continue in NATO because it is a commitment of the Colombian government and the Colombian state, and the government is respectful of such agreements and covenants regarding all international treaties. But we want to maintain ourselves here, thinking of these new interesting debates that are proposed here, thanks to the partners such as the EAN University, and always thinking of the need to improve the standards of our military services in general, which are standards that have to do with transparency, as I've said, and fighting corruption, but also operational factors and effectiveness, but also training and intelligence, but never forgetting exchanging, because we also have to contribute to other countries around the globe. And it would seem strange, but in this polarized world sometimes, participation in this multilateral venues is so important, not just in NATO. We are participating in the OECD that has a different view on economic factors, but that enables Colombia to be a part of this discussion. And if we do it from our point of view, from our national development plan and from our priorities, very surely we're going to have positive results for our country. President Brigitte, do you have a comment about this question? Not right now? That's fine. And I will complement this question with question on the other side of the coin, if you will. That is also a question here in Slido, and that's, what are the benefits for the UK and for the United States of having Colombia and this associate position within NATO? And I would add the new topics that we've discussed in the conversation. Ambassador Smith, would you care to answer this question?
Sure. From the United States perspective, we find ourselves increasingly facing a wide range of global challenges that simply cannot be tackled by one country alone. Whether you're talking about global pandemics or climate change, cybersecurity challenges, questions of disinformation, counterterrorism, these are challenges that cross borders. And where really the United States needs partners and allies around the world. And so we are all in agreement at NATO that our work here should not be limited to simply the members of the alliance, which brings strength in its own right, but that we're even stronger by working with a collection of partners around the world. We're now facing a situation where the alliance has over 40 partners around the world, and each one of those partners brings a unique perspective, insights, and expertise into this alliance each time that we engage with them. So irrespective of the challenge we're talking about, I think the feeling both in the United States and across the alliance is that we are fundamentally stronger when we work those issues together. It is not about just a single nation taking on something like global pandemic or even a small group of allies doing so. It used to be in the past that the United States would look at its friends in Europe or its friends in Latin America or its friends in Asia, but now we're finding that those silos are washing away as all of us reach the conclusion that we have to think and act globally. And having Colombia as our partner here at NATO is one shining example of that.
Muchas gracias, Embajadora Smith.
Thank you, Ambassador Smith. Ambassador Quarrey, same question to you, sir. On the benefits for the UK and for the United States for this collaboration between Colombia and NATO.
Thank you. I think I have very little to add to what Ambassador Smith has just said. We recognize that most of the international security challenges that we face in today's world are global and interconnected in some way or another. And you can see this actually with the conflict in Ukraine. If you look at the impact that has had on food security around the world, the impact on food prices for many people, the availability of food. If you look at the impact on energy security for millions of people, billions of people around the world. You can't separate conflicts these days from their impacts. You can't just geographically limit those impacts. So as Ambassador Smith said, we need strong partnerships enabled to be able to deal with the consequences of conflict, but also to try to prevent conflict in the future and to understand the relationships between this complex set of issues. Is it climate change? Is it women, peace and security? Is it energy security? But we can only do that really through effective partnerships. And our strong interest here is for NATO to develop a network of strong partnerships, each of which will be different in character, as Ambassador Smith said, each of which has got to work for the individual partners concerned, but all of which we hope will strengthen the open, liberal, democratic order through which, from which we all benefit. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Embajador.
Thank you, Ambassador Quarrey. There is another question that I'd like to aim to President Baptiste. It's a question about the role that the academia can have and the teaching staff and the students and experts in general, and the role they might play to potentiate or improve this relationship between NATO and Colombia. You being the representative of the academia in this panel, how do you see this future contributions that might be made from the different fields of knowledge? Well, the academia has an important role as in any issue. And I think we have the challenge here of being more functional and thinking of international agreements and security aspects and contribute better towards these, because there are critical decisions being made here for many other fields. So if our university, EAN, can contribute tools or elements that can contribute to these topics, it's critical that we do so. We are continuously generating information and positions about climate change and climate crisis that apply to all sectors, and always trying to think of shared solutions, innovative solutions, both in the institutional approaches as well as the geopolitical approaches that have collaboration between different parties as a key element. But sometimes the academia doesn't receive the signals on time, or other bodies have their agendas, and sometimes it's hard to keep up to the pace of these international agreements. In this case, we have our antennas, pointed and ready to understand these topics of climate change and the Paris protocols and what came out of the Kyoto agreements in terms of biodiversity, the TCC. And we continuously participate in these spaces to generate relationships and bring in the talent. We need the young people, and we need the people that are now educating themselves in project management and international negotiation. For example, our international business courses have these as cross-cutting topics when we talk about climate security and international security as subjects to have the possibility for our students to participate effectively in the current affairs that have to do with these topics, so that the academia is more and more relevant. Thank you so much, President. I don't have a question in the platform of the topic I want to introduce, but I think that thinking about the next NATO summit to come without talking about the war between Russia and Ukraine don't make little sense. So I want to ask you about the next summit and how you see discussions on this topic. In particular, I'd like to start with Ambassador Arias Rodriguez to see how you see our affiliation to NATO and foreign affairs policy, and how the Colombian government has given us a position. Sure, the Colombian government rejects invasion of Russia in Ukraine and any use of violence that harms the territorial integrity of any country in the world. Not just that, but as we have stated, and thinking of this missile that was aimed at civilians in one of the cities in Ukraine, I believe Kiev, that affected some Colombian civilians, we reject any action of the sort that affects civilians or professionals exercising their profession. And regarding NATO in particular, we said we're not a part of this conflict, or we're not a party to this conflict. We want there to be peace so that we can finally dedicate all efforts to climate change, for example. But we are on the side of applying international laws. We are on the side of keeping this vision of legal regulation that should be first and foremost in any circumstance like this. We have made our statement and position visible in NATO and in the European Union, and all we want is that this war comes to an end, so end the suffering, and we are ready to participate even from this relationship with NATO to participate in humanitarian demining, for example, as soon as the conflict is over and there is an end to the Russian invasion. Thank you, Ambassador Rojas Rodriguez. Ambassador Smith, how do you see this discussion about the war between Russia and Ukraine for the upcoming summit? And do you feel this is an opportunity to consolidate perhaps a coalition to support Ukraine versus this invasion?
Well, Russia's war in Ukraine will be a major focus of the summit in about a week's time. It was last year on February 24th that NATO took a decision that morning that individually we would stand with Ukraine as it defends its territory against this unprovoked aggression. We also, though, took the decision the morning of February 24th last year not to have NATO directly engaged in this conflict. And for that reason, the alliance is not providing direct lethal support to Ukraine, nor is the alliance training Ukrainian soldiers. But collectively, we stand with Ukraine, and many of us are providing security assistance. All of us are providing humanitarian and economic assistance. And so what we will do in Vilnius is we will come together and reaffirm our determination to stand with Ukraine as it defends its sovereignty. We will call on Russia to end this war. Russia started this war. It could end this war today if it so desired. But we will also talk at the summit about NATO's longer-term relationship with Ukraine. NATO has had a close relationship with Ukraine as a partner for many years, and it will continue to have a relationship with Ukraine going forward. It was in 2008 that the alliance said that Ukraine will become a member of the alliance. We will reaffirm that commitment that we made in 2008, and we will talk about the ways in which we're going to help Ukraine with a whole package of deliverables as it relates to practical support on things like their longer-term military modernization, and then our political relationship and ways that we can enhance that as well. So this is an important moment. We believe that President Zelensky will come in person. And what will be interesting is we will also have many of our partners. For example, we will have the leaders of our 4 Indo-Pacific partners, the leaders of Japan, South Korea, Australia, and New Zealand will also be joining us at the NATO Summit in Vilnius, and no doubt they will be stating their own bilateral support for Ukraine against Russia's aggression.
Gracias, Embajadora Smith. Embajador
Thank you, Ambassador Smith. Ambassador Quarrey, what are the expectations that your country, and thinking of United Kingdom, has about this discussion of the war between Ukraine and Russia for the upcoming summit?
Thank you. Well, I'm sure Ambassador Smith is right. The Vilnius Summit next week will see very strong alliance unity and resolve in supporting Ukraine as it fights, as it is perfectly entitled to do under the United Nations Charter, to defend its sovereignty and territorial integrity. And it is really worth remembering and emphasizing that nobody wants peace more than the people of Ukraine. They are paying a terrible humanitarian price for Putin's decision to invade Ukraine. Like Ambassador Smith, I send my condolences to those Colombians who tragically died in Ukraine recently. They are unfortunately yet another example of this terrible human cost of this cost of international law. President Zelensky has set out his peace plan. And at the top of that plan is respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity as enshrined in the principles of the UN Charter. That must be the way forward. As Ambassador Smith said, it is within Russia's gift to end this war tomorrow if it, as a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council, respected the principles of the United Nations Charter. So I'm sure at Vilnius next week, we will all be emphasizing our enduring commitment and support to Ukraine as it fights to restore its sovereignty and territorial integrity. And we will be with them all the way, but nobody wants peace more than they do.
Muchas gracias, Embajador.
Thank you, Ambassador. Last question, and we do have only 4 minutes left, and it's a question that has been presented in different ways, but it's talking about the internal Colombian armed conflict and the efforts to achieve peace, thinking of this conflict and our role as NATO allies. What relationship, what contributions, how can a relationship with NATO favor a peaceful resolution to the Colombian conflict? And I want to pick up perhaps on the expectations of President Brigitte and Ambassador Rojas. Brigitte, do you have a reaction about this? Short and quick response, yes. I believe that awareness that Colombia is an important stakeholder in these multilateral affairs, that we are partners in many global initiatives, the understanding that we are a country and now a series of countries that have led and respected many contributions towards peace, I think will let us work more robustly as collaborating countries to bring forward the capabilities and mechanisms and tools that are necessary for effective international cooperation. Sometimes, being small-minded doesn't let us understand that local peace is global peace as well. Ambassador Rojas Rodriguez, go ahead, please. I think the most important aspect of a relationship with NATO regarding our internal armed conflict is about having strengthened military services. It's about having more professional, democratic, and transparent services to assume the new challenges proposed by our internal security challenges in the future and the international challenges for that matter. I believe these military services with the NATO standards that have to do with international law and will help us so that we can, for example, have a peace accord with the ELN guerrilla that hopefully complies with the ceasefire we're negotiating, and that lets us advance in this great effort of a total peace initiative from our government. I think we're in the right direction of democracy, peace, and human rights. Thinking of this relationship with NATO, and I want to highlight this as a special bond that we've developed. I want to thank the United States and the UK for the great support they provide in this bilateral relationship with each one of your countries, but also thinking of our presence and participation in NATO. I know we share these values with you and with NATO. Thank you. Okay, well, this intervention from Ambassador Rojas Rodriguez, we consider our panel discussion as closed. I want to officially thank our sponsors and virtual hosts of this event. EAN University, and that's President Brigitte Baptiste, of course, Ambassador Palmieri and the U.S. Embassy at Bogota, Colombia. And I don't want to go without thanking Ambassadors Smith and Ambassador Quarrey and Ambassador Rojas Rodriguez in this very important discussion where I want to invite you to follow in the upcoming week the summit of NATO in Lithuania. Please keep track of these conversations. I'm sure it will be crucial discussions for Colombia's participation in NATO and for the future of our international relationship. Thank you very much, everybody.